that happened locally. We want to set the scene by just letting you know we're going to be really having three parts of our program. So the first part is our Town Hall Committee will be presenting an historical overview of the Port Chicago disaster and the Mutiny Trial, just to give everyone the background and do some level setting so people who aren't familiar with it at all have an understanding of what happened in 1944. Secondly, we have family members of those who were affected by the disaster and the Mutiny Trial, and we are really excited to have their insights around what it was like and what it has been like to have family members as part of this situation or part of this event, which is little well known but very impactful on a number of fronts. Thirdly, we have some invited guests from the National Park Service, from the Friends of Port Chicago Foundation, and from the East Bay Regional Park Black Employee Collective, as well as our naval officer, who are going to talk a little bit about their own highlights of the historical perspective, some interpretive insights from their experience and their studying and involvement in this event, as well as some action steps. What we want to do is ensure that people know how to support spreading the story, as well as how we can support the actions that are already in motion by these four representatives, organizations. So each section, the first three sections, will take probably about 20 minutes. And then in the end, we do have a little bit of time for Q&A, questions and answers, and comments. So as we get started, just keep in mind that what our committee wants to emphasize is that this program is about raising awareness about the important chapter that the Port Chicago disaster has in the civil rights struggle. And we want to tell the story of what happened at Port Chicago because it's an important story for all of us to hear, and it's not as known as it should be. So we're hoping that you will take away this story that you can follow up and share in your professional networks and social circles. So what's happened in Port Chicago is really too important to allow the story to fade. And as Dr. Martin Luther King so eloquently put
We're
it,
getting tired of hand washing.
injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And so until that's eradicated, we're still fighting that battle. So with that in mind, let's turn to our story. So we're going to go back to the 1940s. And as you know, the United States in the early 1940s was a nation at war. And we were fighting Germany, Japan, and Italy in Europe, and then North Africa, and then the Pacific Theater. So at home, America was continuing to be a segregated nation. Since the end of Reconstruction in 1877, there was the rise of the Jim Crow codes. There was segregation. There were widespread de facto practices such as redlining, which in essence created two Americas, with African Americans living one America, which was denied equal rights to every sector, from housing to employment to education to the use of public accommodations to travel to every aspect of life. And that is something that we have talked about a lot in our town hall sessions. So within the United States, of course, we had the military service, and the same was true for the military. African Americans who may have been enticed to enlist into the military to serve their country were also denied equal rights. And so they weren't treated the same in every branch of the military service. And so what was happening is they were being relegated to not combat, but to mess service, or if they were allowed, for example, on a ship, in most cases, to menial tasks that were very far from the combat that they thought they were going to be trained to participate in and were ready to serve their country. And one of those places where this happened was in Port Chicago.
My name is Albert Williams Jr.
And there's a little clip.
Back then there wasn't any jobs so available for us young
My name is Robert Ralph Jr. I was 17 years old and had just completed the 8th grade, and I thought my enlistment would help to make the country a better place for us Negroes. We didn't use the term blacks in those days. Now, I know it'll send me back home someday, I know.
So Teresa, some people aren't seeing the picture.
There isn't a picture.
R. Randolph Small. See, I was drafted by the Navy.
And some people aren't hearing.
Drafted by the government.
Okay, I'm not sure. There isn't another picture to show right now, but I'm just playing the audio. So
Okay.
I've got it
So
up as
people
high
may
as I
just
can
need-
go.
Yeah, people may just need to turn up their individual volume. It's very low on mine as well. Just
Yeah, I have it up as high as I can go.
okay.
Do you want me to continue?
Can anyone hear it?
It's barely here. You can barely hear it. So maybe if you can start over and we can turn up our volume, but it's very difficult to articulate the sound.
Right.
And also, Teresa, do you have I know when I host a Zoom meeting, there's like a little button you have to hit to share the audio.
Yeah, I've got that turned on.
Okay.
So
Okay, good, great.
okay, I can keep going. We've got
Yeah.
several different clips, so I could just finish this one up and we'll see how it goes, and we can decide if
Okay.
we want to do the other ones.
Okay, and just to give some context, what you're hearing in what will happen hopefully throughout the presentation, we thought it was really important to bring to life the actual voices of people who were involved in the Port Chicago disaster. So that's what you're hearing, if you can hear it, and if not, that's what's going on. So let's see if they can hear, and then hopefully the next clip will be a little bit louder. Thanks, Teresa.
All right, do you want me to continue this one, or do you want to just go on to the next part and I will work on it in the back end?
Yeah, why don't we just go on to the next part? So I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan, who's going to take it from what happened at Port Chicago.
Thanks, Benisa. So shortly after the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, Congress approved plans for the establishment of terminal facilities at Port Chicago, California. And here is an aerial photograph that shows the facility, including the pier that extended into Sassoon Bay. Port Chicago was situated on over 5,000 acres, and the facilities included a 500-foot-long pier that you can see there at the bottom of the photograph for loading ships, 27 barricaded sidings to accommodate 203 boxcars, 4 barracks for enlisted men, a commissary, and a boiler house. Later, the Navy modified the pier so that they could load 2 ships simultaneously, and that began on May 10th, 1944. So Port Chicago, the Navy used African-American sailors as stevedores, and they loaded the ships around the clock. The pace was hectic, the work was arduous, and the working conditions were abysmal. The officers were Caucasian. The Navy did not train the sailors in how to handle or load the munitions. A local stevedore union offered to train the men at Port Chicago, but the Navy did not accept this offer. The officers demanded speed, pitting crews against one another in competitions, with some officers placing wagers on the outcome. And these were the ingredients for the disaster that followed. I'd like to turn it over to Patanisha, who will take us through the disaster.
I think you're on mute.
Well, that helps to unmute yourself, doesn't it? On July 17th, 1944, at 22:18 hours, the SS E.A. Bryan, a new cargo vessel of the Liberty class, detonated in 2 successive explosions, involving an estimated 3.5 million pounds of explosive, completely destroying that ship, another cargo vessel, the Quantonaut Victory, which was empty, and 16 rail cars and the pier. Here is a diagram showing the 2 ships, the rail cars, and their arrangement on the pier.
I'm still working on the audio.
Okay. Here are some facts and statistics to help us understand the force of the explosions, along with some images of destruction. Next slide, please. The explosion's blast zone was approximately 15 miles with broken windows reported in Benicia. That's a long way. The explosion involved the equivalent of 4,606 tons of TNT on E.A. Bryant, 40% full, and 16 rail cars with 429 tons. Next slide, please. The explosion's force flung the other ship docked at Pier 1, the Quantonaut Victory, and about 500 yards into Sassoon Bay. The explosion registered 3.4 on the Richter scale, and it was felt more than 450 miles away. The explosion created a crater 66 feet deep, 300 feet wide, and 700 feet long. A pilot flying an airplane in the area at 10,000 feet of altitude reported seeing large pieces of debris from the explosion flying up near his aircraft. This was the largest man-made detonation in recorded history to that point. The toll of human life was great. On that day, 320 sailors died. All of those who perished were on the ships, the pier, or the immediate shore. Only 51 of the dead were identified. 202 of the fatalities were African-American sailors ranging in age from 17 to 23. This was 15% of African-Americans killed in all of World War II. The wounded numbered 390, of which 252 were military and 138 were civilians. So I want to continue to tell you more about the work stoppage. In the immediate aftermath, the Navy ordered 328 African-American sailors to clean up the disaster site. The cleanup was a gruesome task, requiring the survivors to retrieve fragments of human remains thrown around from the blast site. None of them received survivor's leave, while white sailors did receive 30 days survivor's leave. By early August, Congress created a survivors compensation scheme. Because of objections from Mississippi Congressman John Rankin, the 202 African-American families received $3,000, which was 3/5 of the death benefits originally proposed. Slide 9, please. On July 30th, the Navy ordered the African-American survivors to Mare Island Naval Yard. By August 9th, the Navy ordered the men to return to the work of loading munitions. The men were afraid of returning to the dangerous work under the same conditions that produced the disastrous explosion that killed the men they knew, and in many cases regarded as their friends. The Navy marched the men in formation to the general area where the loading would take place. And when the order came to make the turn that would take them there unmistakably, many of the men balked and stopped marching. Originally, 258 out of the 328 sailors refused to go back to loading. The Navy put them on a prison barge where they were confined in crowded conditions for 3 days, only leaving for the mess hall and taking there under armed guard. Admiral Wright addressed the 250 men held on the prison barge at Mare Island on August. He told them, "I want to remind you men that munitions conduct in time of war carries the death sentence, and the hazards of facing a firing squad are far greater than the hazards of handling ammunition. After this,
No response.
Oh, I'm going to try the audio again if you're all right with that. Yeah.
I'm ready. Go ahead.
He told us, he said, well, one thing I want to tell you, that you could be charged with mutiny if you don't go back to work.
And he explained at that time, if we refused to go back to work, he could have us shot.
That was the cue. When he said you could be shot, then the fellas went to mumbling. You know, a lot of people, they afraid to die.
And from my upbringing, my mother taught me that if a white man threatened to hang you, he would do it at his first legal chance. And she told me about the Klan, and she was brought up in Mississippi. So I believed that they had a legal chance to shoot us. So I was afraid. So I said, well, I'm not going to give them a chance to shoot me. I'll go back to work.
But then 50 of us decided we wasn't going to go back to work. If we was going to get shot, we just had to shoot us because we wasn't going to go back and load no more ammunition.
That's when we were arrested. I would say arrested because we was all shipped to, I think it was Treasure Island. We was at the stockade. Then we was found out that we was charged with mutiny.
We didn't commit no mutiny. We didn't take over no ship. We didn't take over a base. We had no weapons. We didn't even have a pen. We only refused to go back to work. Now, how could that be mutiny?
I didn't know anything about mutiny. I just knew that I didn't want to work under the same conditions that I did work under and advance the chance of the same thing happening again.
Back to you, Patnisha.
After this, 208 of the initial group of the 258 then agreed to return to work loading munitions. Several of them later testified at the mutiny trial, having been called as the prosecution's witness. Even so, the 208 sailors were convicted in summary courts, martial, and sentenced to administrative discharges plus forfeiture of 3 months' pay. And Heidi will begin to talk to you more about the mutiny trial. Thank you.
The Navy convened a court-martial for the remaining men known as the Port Chicago 50, who went on trial for mutiny at Yerba Buena Island. The trial lasted 6 weeks with 32 days of proceedings, generating more than 1,400 pages of transcript in 7 volumes. The Port Chicago 50 were represented by 5 defense attorneys. Some of the key rulings of the court included sustaining the prosecution's objections to any evidence of the working conditions faced by the men before the explosion as irrelevant, overruling defense objections to the use of hearsay statements by unidentified men as evidence of conspiracy by all of the 50 on trial, rejecting defense arguments that the men's expressions of fear about a particular task, namely loading munitions, while dutifully fulfilling any other task, did not amount to a usurpation of military authority. Rejecting defense arguments that some of the men on trial had not received an order to load munitions, including 2 in sick call, receiving treatment for injuries from the explosion, and a 3rd who was under doctor's orders not to load ammunition and had been assigned duty as a mess cook instead. On October, pardon me?
Alyssa's coming for dinner on Saturday.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Please go on mute if you're not speaking. Thank you.
On October 24th, 1944, following deliberations lasting 80 minutes, including the lunch hour, the court-martial found the Port Chicago 50 guilty of mutiny. The Port Chicago 50 received sentences of 8 to 15 years of hard labor.
guilty. The verdict was guilty as charged. I expected it. The way the trial went, of course, the length of the sentence was a surprise.
The lowest sentence in there, I think, was 8 years. I had 12 years, and some had 16.
Well, I don't know. I don't know whether I don't even remember crying behind it. I know I did after I got into prison for a while. But I just seemed like it was something that was going to happen then after the trial. You know, after you sit in the trial for a few days and you see what was going down.
Okay, Heidi.
NAACP legal counsel Thurgood Marshall traveled to the Bay Area to observe the trial. Marshall held a press conference and announced to the press that the defendants were deprived of basic due process. Marshall told the press that all of American society was on trial. Marshall held a second press conference to announce that the NAACP was requesting a government investigation into the working conditions at Port Chicago. After the trial, Marshall represented the Port Chicago 50 for purposes of their appeals, both post-trial to the court-martial convened at Yerba Buena Island and later to the Secretary of the Navy. We will repeat selected arguments Marshall made concerning the mutiny trial. Regarding the treatment of the men as a unitary whole rather than 50 individuals, mass prosecutions of this type calculated to dispose of a large group of men with one swoop militate against our whole traditional concept of personal guilt, in the hope that by proper administration of our procedure, an innocent man shall never be convicted through a callous indifference as to the fairness and integrity of the trial to which he is subjected. Commenting on the conspiracy evidence, the entire case against the accused is built upon testimony as to statements allegedly made by other accused and by parties not accused, and even worse, by unnamed, unidentified individuals with no connection whatsoever to either the accused or the alleged crime. Pointing out the speed of the deliberations, although the record of the actual trial of the case includes 1,435 pages, single-spaced and on legal-sized paper, the court arrived at its findings of guilty between 11:55 a.m. and 1:15 p.m. Even if we assume that the entire 80 minutes was spent in deliberation on this case, each individual accused received about a minute and a half of deliberation. This callous disregard of even perfunctory justice is amazing. Marshall argued with the court that the court erred when it refused to use the definition of mutiny in a treatise by Winthrop. Mutiny has been variously described. It is believed, properly be defined as consisting of unlawful opposition or resistance to, or defiance of superior military authority with a deliberate purpose to usurp, subvert, or override the same, or to eject with authority from office. Referring to the lack of evidence to support a finding of mutiny, in order for mutiny to occur, there must be a defiance of or resistance to superior military authority with a deliberate purpose to usurp, subvert, or override the same, or to eject authority from office. The record shows only the refusal of the men to obey the order to load ammunition because they were afraid. There is no evidence of any attempt to usurp superior authority. There is no evidence of an attempt to override superior authority. The men were respectful in their attitude toward their superiors. They were afraid to handle ammunition and told the officers they were afraid as a result of the explosion. Marshall's appeals were unsuccessful. To speak about the immediate aftermath is Jonathan Lee. You're on.
In May 1945, the war in Europe ended. With the use of the 2 atomic bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, the war in the Pacific came to its end on September 2nd, 1945. In January 1946, all of the Port Chicago 50 were released from prison. After this grant of clemency, 47 of the men returned to service in the Navy. All of the men were granted a general discharge. The Navy officially eliminated all racial barriers within the service in February 1946. And on July 26, 1948, President Truman issued Executive Order 9981, desegregating the entire U.S. military.
Did we get a discharge?
My discharge from the Navy prevented me from receiving jobs that I would have received as a civilian. It branded me as a person incapable of following orders.
I used to couldn't talk about it because it would hurt. It was hurt inside. You didn't want your friends to know that you was in the service and you had been charged with mutiny. You didn't want people to think that you didn't like your country or something, that you do something like that. That's the only country we knew about.
Not even with the fellows I work with. I didn't talk with my wife or children. Every time I would bring it up or even think about it, it looked like I got a hateful feeling in me, and it was just about to tear me apart. I just hated the other race. And the hate was building up. It stayed with me. The hate stayed with me. Hate can really destroy a person. I could have been a better father, I believe, if I hadn't had that hate. I wouldn't abuse it or nothing, but I just, things that I didn't talk about, things I held in, things I think I could have did better.
Jonathan?
Thank you. These events from Port Chicago to Executive Order 9981 proved to be a catalyst for the emergence of the civil rights movement as a leading force for social change in this country. In the decade that followed World War II, the Supreme Court decided Brown versus Board of Education, siding with Thurgood Marshall's arguments. Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott and other direct nonviolent actions occurred. And the murder of 14-year-old Emmett Till sparked outrage, as well as so many more examples from the 1950s and 60s, too many to list here. The NAACP published a pamphlet titled Remember Port Chicago. In 1989, Dr. Robert Allen published the Port Chicago Mutiny, based in part on his interviews with members of the Port Chicago 50, after he came across the NAAC's pamphlet to Remember Port Chicago. One of the men he interviewed was Joseph R. Small Sr., pictured here. Mr. Small was considered a leader among the Port Chicago 50. He was 23, which made him older than most of the other men, and the other men gravitated to his mature leadership. Years later, when the Navy reviewed the Port Chicago incident in the 1990s, by the way, concluding that there was racism in the Navy at the time, but that it did not play a role in the events at Port Chicago, when that was made known, Mr. Small explained that most of the Port Chicago 50 did not want a pardon because seeking and obtaining a pardon implied that they had done something wrong. Instead, they wanted the mutiny convictions set aside and they wanted compensation for the lost pay that they had experienced. Now, we've only scratched the surface of this story tonight. For more details, Dr. Allen's book stands as the leading authority on the events at Port Chicago and the trial. It's a great addition to any library, book club calendar, or your personal reading list. The detail he provides based on his interviews of Joe Small and the other men, and his in-depth review of the historical record, including the NAACP papers and the trial transcript, is truly a stunning book to read and beyond the scope of our program. We encourage you to read his book. We will hear more about possible action steps, such as reading his book or other steps. But for now, our committee fervently hopes that you will remember Port Chicago and you will tell the story of what happened, who suffered and who sacrificed and the reasons why, and how those events paved the way for progress in the area of civil rights. And at this time, to help us better understand the adverse effects of the events at Port Chicago, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Jason Felix. His uncle John was one of the sailors who died in the explosions at Port Chicago. Jason Felix served himself in the U.S. Air Force for, I believe, over 25 years. And he recently recorded Dr. Allen's book, The Port Chicago Mutiny, on Audible. So if you are interested in that book, one of the ways you can enjoy it is to go there and listen to it. We are so honored to have him join us tonight. Thank you, Mr. Felix, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate the opportunity to address this august group of people. And yes, I did serve in the Air Force. I was actually for 30 years. And it was during my time in the Air Force that I actually became aware of this story. Oddly enough, that awareness came at 20 years in the military, and it was not directly from the Air Force itself. My mother had told me about the story. Again, after I had served for 20 years, she had never mentioned this account to me, but for some reason, she decided to share the story with me. At the time, I was serving on active duty at the Pentagon. I was working as the senior enlisted advisor for the chief prosecutor for the Office of Military Commissions. And our particular focus was to try the enemy combatants held at Guantanamo Bay for their nefarious acts. And my mom decided to share the story with me almost casually as part of a conversation we had on the phone one evening. And I was absolutely amazed and shocked by the story. And, I thought to myself, something that's so significant historically, militarily, something so significant as this should be shared not only throughout the military, because it is part of American history, not just military history. Something like this should be shared on a much larger scale so that people know this story. And, the old saying goes, if you don't know history, then you may repeat it. We certainly don't need situations like this repeated. And in my military career, we've had extensive training on diversity and inclusion, on human rights, individuals' rights. Never has this particular account been shared in any of that training. And again, it was shocking to me. When my mother told me about the story, I had the opportunity while I was at the Pentagon to request leave so that I could take my mother to the dedication that was held at the park in 2010. And, I thought the story was so compelling and that it had such an impact on my mother when she shared it with me that I wanted her to be there. I wanted her to visit the place where her older brother perished. And she shared with me at the time that she was just 7 years old when the explosion occurred. And she shared that Uncle Junie, as we called him, he had died in the military, but she didn't know specifically how. All she knew as a 7-year-old was that he went in the Navy and he died in the war. She came across Dr. Allen's book and she read that book, and then she became more aware of the details and the circumstances that took my uncle's life. And she bought several copies of that book. She shared them with as many relatives as she could so that the family would know the story. My particular intention, along with countless others, is, obviously based on this call, is to make sure that this story gets shared. After I retired from the military, I decided to become a voiceover actor. I've had opportunities to do voiceover work in the past and, on a very small scale. And I thought, doing voiceover work in retirement would be something enjoyable and comfortable. I received an email from the Veterans Administration probably about 2 years ago. And the email said that there is a database that lists all of the military members who died in action and where they were interred. I looked up my Uncle Judy's name to see where in fact he was interred. Now I know that his remains were never located, and that's pretty obvious in the book. But I looked to see if there was a plot or something beyond the existing memorial at Port Chicago that bared his name and, you know, contained some semblance of his remains. Nothing existed. I understand at the Golden Gate Cemetery, there are plots that have unknown sailors. And at the time, and after having looked at the list of sailors that died in the explosion, I thought to myself, that was really peculiar that there are tombstones that say unknown sailor when the names of every single sailor are known. Why is that not represented? So that was the impetus for my contacting Reverend McDaniel and Dr. Allen and sharing with them my experience as a voiceover artist and my desire to try to do something to share the story and to address the tombstones. I suggested that I record the book absolutely for free, and that the proceeds from the sale of the book be used to actually put the names of the sailors on the markers in the Golden Gate Cemetery. I've since come to understand that, you know, the reason why that was done is because at the time, obviously, DNA technology didn't exist, especially to the extent it does now. So the remains that were interred in those plots were in fact unknown. There was no way to determine what part of, you know, one's anatomy was actually in that tomb. And I understand, you know, several are lumped together. So to that end, you know, I understand that may not be an undertaking that we want to pursue. But in order to make sure that the story is shared, doing the audiobook, I think, will help toward that end. I'm really thankful that Dr. Allen wrote the book. I'm really thankful that the National Park Service is putting forth, you know, their efforts to make sure that the story stays alive. The book production has completed. It will be available soon. It's currently under review by Audible, and I expect that the book will be available later this month. So to the extent that anyone can actually get the book and read it, I recommend that highly. But if you're not able to, getting the audiobook and, you know, listening to it during your daily commute to and from work, or, you know, any other available time that you have, will certainly be worthwhile. And I'm saying that not because I have any other interest in the book, any other vested interest in the book, other than getting the story out. Because again, I did this for free because I wanted to share the story. And again, you know, thank you, Jonathan, and thank you and your team for continuing to share this story with as many people as possible. And, you know, I sincerely hope that there will be additional things that'll, you know, come out of the effort that you're putting forth. So again, thank you.
Thank you very much. Vanessa, would you like to transition us to the next part?
Sure. Thank you so much for sharing those words, Jason, and for it's just amazing to me to hear that it took so long for how you even learned about the story, not from your family, but from being in the service, and then also with your mom, and then her passion with trying to tell the story, and how you are taking on that same torch. It is a story to be told. And to help us with this story, we want to continue the program with some of our invited guests. And we have several organizations and entities who have been working, just as Jason has, working diligently to get this story out and to ensure people are aware of it. And one of the things I also wanted to say with Jason is just the fact, with the picture of your uncle, how young these sailors were, going from like 16 to 22 years old is just amazing in the work and effort that they took on to fight and stand up, and then just the aftermath of what happened.
Right.
So with us today, we have the Friends of Port Chicago Foundation. We have a representative from the military, the U.S. Navy. We have representatives from the Regional Park Service, the East Bay Regional Park Service, and the Black Employee Collective, and then also the National Park Service. And we've just asked them to highlight any historical reflections that they want to expand upon or bring up that may not have been discussed yet, and that they feel is important to share with this group, any interpretive insights that they have by their familiarity with the events, and then also how we, who may just be learning about the story, can support them in taking action. So with that, we're going to start with the Friends of Port Chicago Foundation. And with us, we have Mark Bruner. And Mark is actually an attorney with Perkins Cole, and is a board member of the Friends of Port Chicago Foundation. So with that, I would like to welcome you to say a few words.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. Okay,
Yes,
good
Mark.
evening. My name is Mark Brunner, and I'm on the board of Friends of Port Chicago National Memorial. And the Friends of Port Chicago is the official partner of the National Park Service. And we were created in 2007 to help promote what's now the Port Chicago Naval Magazine National Park. Then it was National Memorial, a national monument, and to promote and enhance the vitally important story of Port Chicago. And I first got involved more than a decade ago as a pro bono land use attorney to advise the Friends on the future Port Chicago Visitor Center. And right now the park is located on an active Army base, and so it can be challenging to access at times. And so the visitor center is going to make it much more accessible as part of a new regional park that's being developed. And at that time, when I first got involved, the visitor center was just a very distant gleam in our very hopeful eyes, but it will soon become a reality at the newly named Thurgood Marshall Regional Park, home of the Port Chicago 50 in Concord, due to the hard and sustained work over many years of the National Park Service and the East Bay Regional Park District. The Park District adopted a land use plan in July for this new great regional park, and it's now undertaking the work to make the new park and the visitor center a significant and lasting feature of our Bay Area landscape. And the visitor center will help tell the story of Port Chicago through education and interactive exhibits. And we will need help from the community and your generosity to get it all off the ground. And it's been one of the Friends Group core missions since our founding. And we've been working collaboratively with the National Park District and the Regional Park District for a long time to make this happen. And please consider a donation to our Friends Group so that we can continue to do the essential work needed to help the Park Service and the Park District in fulfilling their missions and in building the new park and the visitor center. And please come out to the annual commemoration event, which we hold at the memorial in the National Park. We hold it every July, and it's a very moving and poignant ceremony to honor and remember and preserve this vitally important story of Port Chicago. But I want to also mention a second core mission of our Friends Group, and that's the full exoneration of the Port Chicago 50. Justice demands nothing less. In December 1999, more than 55 years after this unjust conviction, President Clinton issued a pardon to Freddie Meeks, one of the men who was convicted. But a pardon, as we alluded to earlier, that's not an exoneration. A pardon simply exempts someone from punishment. It's not an acquittal. All of the sailors and all of the men who showed their bravery in July of 1944 None should be saddled with guilt. They all deserve justice. There have been several important exonerations in recent years, and I want to give special mention and thanks to Congressman Mark DeSaulnier and Congresswoman Barbara Lee. In pushing legislation in 2019 that passed the House of Representatives, Congressman DeSaulnier eloquently stated, and I'm paraphrasing a bit here, that the names of these brave men have been tarnished by our history of racial discrimination for far too long, and it is now time to right this wrong and give the Port Chicago 50 the respect they deserved so many years ago. In again pushing a resolution that passed the House in September of this year, Congressman DeSaulnier reemphasized that in order to achieve full racial justice, we must reckon with the dark chapters of our past, and we need to restore the honor to the service records of these men. But despite these valiant and repeated efforts, we still have work to do to actually achieve exoneration and get these men acquitted. It's time now, indeed, to exonerate the Port Chicago 50. We have more partners focused on this effort, including the military, and it's clearly gaining steam. And just like the new park and the new visitor center, with patience, perseverance, and dedication, and your help, it will soon become a reality. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. So again, some key actions that we can take to support this effort. And with that, I would like to introduce Tom House, who is a retired Navy Lieutenant Commander. And I want to say congratulations on his retirement. I think it was just as recent as within the last couple of weeks or so. So thank you for your service, and I'm really interested in what you would like to share and how you feel folks can support and get involved with this story with Port Chicago.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Benisa. I really, really appreciate the time to address all you and give you my perspective. So yes, you're absolutely right. I just retired. My last day on active duty was November 1st. So I'm growing my my beard out a little bit. So I hadn't had that for the last 25 years. So the last job I was at was as an executive officer at the Military Ocean Terminal Concord. And in the realm of COVID-19, we had to do a virtual celebration that year. And I was tapped for giving a recording. And I made the mistake of pre-recording a message that stated that they were exonerated. The Port Chicago 50 were actually exonerated. And Tori Spelling and Kelly English politely corrected me and dubbed over the recording that they were not exonerated. So I created a passion based on putting out some wrong information. And from that, I became kind of the squeaky wheel that was asking for the grease so that these generals and admirals that were coming to visit the Military Ocean Terminal Concord, because it's still an active weapons station, would actually put this decision in front of the Secretary of the Navy. And unfortunately, my fellow officers did not want to take it on, whether that was because either they were too busy or didn't feel like it was worth their time, or they just didn't have the bandwidth to address these certain situations. So I approached it towards the end of my career in the Navy in a way that any good officer should. And I talked to my, what we call NCO Corps, otherwise known in the Navy as our Master Chiefs, the goat locker. And when I started talking to the Master Chiefs, they obviously have a direct line in with the Senior Master Chief of the Navy, called the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy. So currently, I have two Master Chiefs that have kind of taken the torch of after my retirement and start, prepping the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy to kind of propose this to the Chief of Naval Operations. So the Chief of Naval Operations is one step below the Secretary of the Navy. And as you all can guess, unfortunately, even when Congress voted to exonerate these 50 bold sailors, the decision still rests with the Navy. And as a naval officer, that ate me alive. And fortunately, it ate the other two Master Chiefs that I've been working with alive as well. So they are very passionate, and we are trying to get them, I'm not trying to get them. They are trying to carry the torch and get the Secretary of the Navy, who was just confirmed, I think in July timeframe, to review this case. And I think we're past this first 90 days. So we're working to get them exonerated behind the scenes. And they're approaching it through their enlisted ranks as well. But to be honest, I think that the squeaky wheel is getting some grease, although not as fast as I would have liked. I tried to set a goal of my actual retirement date of the end of October, 1st of November, but unfortunately it didn't happen. But I will say that I'm still using my contacts to get all that taken care of. And I'm looking, and I'm hoping we do. Whether that timeline is a year from now or 6 months from now or a couple months from now, I'm not sure. But that's kind of where I stand in it. And again, thank you so much for, putting me on this panel. It's an honor to be in, Mr. Felix Brett's presence, as well as you all as well. Thank you very much for your time.
Great. Thank you. And great. Thank you. Thank you for those words, Lieutenant. I didn't realize it was just this week. So I'm also realizing that I didn't recognize you before the meeting because I have seen you in the taped presentation, and I guess it is because of the facial hair. So miraculous difference as you have gone into your retirement. So with that,
and I just one more thing. I will say, I got lucky and landed my dream job with Salesforce, and as a result of that, with Salesforce comes a lot of influence. And with the passing of General Colin Powell recently, as you can imagine, he sat our board of directors at Salesforce. So Mr. Benioff, who's the CEO, is very passionate about veterans stuff. And so I am continuing to tell a story in the corporate world in hopes that other folks have a way in to, kind of like a 10-prong approach. So the story is not dying on the vine with me, and I'm continuing to tell it.
And that's awesome. You have a whole new audience to branch out. That's really awesome. Thank you. So we also have some guests from the National Park Service. So Eric Stearns, Tori Starling, and Kelly English. And Eric and Tori are park rangers, and Kelly is a chief of interpretation. And they also are intimately involved in telling this story daily on an ongoing basis. So I want to turn it over to them to share their perspective, insights, and again, how we can support and take action.
All right. I think we're all on now. Go ahead, Eric.
Well, first off, thank you all. This has been great. And thank you for everybody's support and continuing support in the future. I think this is a crew that's going to continue pushing this forward. And we're happy at the National Park Service to be telling the story. And I think you guys did a good job of with the presentation. And we really, something that we're enjoying utilizing more is the oral histories, because they're pretty important to be able to hear it for people that are family members like you, Jason. So thank you once again for representing for families today. And yeah, Tori, you want to just talk about how people will get out to the park or how people can go on tours?
Yes, I'd love to. So it was mentioned a little bit earlier that it can be a little bit challenging to get to the memorial itself because it is located inside of an Army base. So we need to ask people to make reservations at least 2 weeks in advance, and then they submit their information to the Army to get cleared to go on base. There's a background check that is done. I just put I think I did. Trying to put the link in the chat. Maybe I did not. I will do that in a moment as soon as I'm done speaking. But you can go to our website and email us and let us know you're interested in a tour. We would then schedule it and confirm with you. And then we meet you either at the John Muir National Historic Site where you can use the restrooms, or we meet you at the Military Ocean Terminal Concord, which is the Army base in which the memorial is located. And then you would ride our park shuttle to get into the memorial and get a tour that lasts about an hour, hour and a half or so. And you can get into a lot more of the details and get immersed in the story of Port Chicago. and learn a little bit more about what happened there and feel what it's like to actually be in the place where the disaster happened, to pay your respects to those that were killed in the disaster and have moments of reflection there. Also to feel what it was like to be in that space and in that place. We have a rail car, a historic rail car that you can go into and experience what it's like to be in that, to you know, how it would have been when the folks were there loading munitions. We hope that you can come and actually experience the memorial for yourself, because it is, it's a very moving experience to be in that place and to see the remnants of the pier and to see the names of those who lost their lives, and be able to be there and actually feel those feelings. I love virtual programs, but actually being in person, it lends a whole different understanding to us all. And so yeah, I encourage you to come out and visit if you can. So I'll go ahead and put those links in the chat right now and pass it off to Kelly.
Great, thanks, Tori.
Thanks, Tori. And I just want to say too that, you know, this is not exactly one of the sites that most people think of when they think of the National Park Service. Most of the time folks think of, say, the Grand Canyon or Yosemite, those really iconic natural parks. And many people don't realize that one of the missions of the National Park Service is to preserve our cultural history in addition to our natural history. And so while we do have the Yellowstones and the Denalis, we also have places that really reflect some of the worst aspects of American history. And this is one of those places that will make you think and will make you wrestle with some of the really ugly nature of this history. And you know, the Navy originally established the memorial back in 1994, created then while the base was still under naval control as part of the Concord Naval Weapons Station. It became an affiliated site of the National Park Service, I believe, in the late 90s, early 2000s. And then finally in 2009 was when it became its own standalone Park Service unit. In fact, it was the first unit that President Barack Obama signed into law after he was elected. And so we have long had it as our mission to get this story out far and wide. There are certainly challenges being located on an active military base with our partners at the Army. But as you can tell with now retired Lieutenant Commander House's enthusiasm and dedication, the Army has become a secondary partner with us in trying to get access for the public to be able to visit the site and to get the story out. We've come a long way, I think, in the Park Service with how we have been telling this story. You know, we've gone from when I first arrived here almost 8 years ago, when the Friends of Fort Chicago would meet and they would have exoneration on their agenda. They would put it at the very end, and we Park Service folks would leave the room because we, as a federal entity, could not be associated with the efforts to try to exonerate the Fort Chicago 50, regardless of how much we personally agreed with those efforts. So we've gone from that to now sort of openly colluding with the military itself in the effort to make an argument for exoneration. And so it's been a real transformation, I think, in terms of the Park Service settling into how to tell this story, and finding a way, because the Army the Army with the Transportation Battalion, they're going to be our neighbors for a long, long time, probably forever in that location. And so we've really been able to lean into our partnership with East Bay Regional Park District as a way of really trying to tell this story all the time. One of the unique aspects of being located where we are is that at the Transportation Battalion, they still use that deep water port for the same purpose that they used it for in 1944. So from time to time, there are missions that require shutting down access to the memorial for extended periods of time. And we happen to be in one of those right now. And so as part of our enabling legislation passed back in 2009, a partnership between the Park Service and East Bay Regional Park District was formed, such that part of the inland portion of the former Concord Naval Weapons Station would eventually be transferred to East Bay Regional Park District as a new regional park that would then play host to a joint visitor center between the National Park Service and East Bay Regional Park District, where we can provide a permanent home for the Port Chicago story, a place where the tours would lead out of, and a place where you could get a thorough grounding and experience of the story, even during the times when access to the memorial is closed. So in that end, we've been really looking forward to the day when the land transfer would happen, and it has finally happened. And now we're embarking on a partnership with East Bay Regional Park District in learning how to tell this story in a combined way, in a joint way between our two agencies. And so at the new Thurgood, the newly named Thurgood Marshall Regional Park, home of the Port Chicago 50, is the new regional park where that will happen. As you can tell, the name itself is very much connected to the Port Chicago story. So that's a partnership that we are leaning into and looking forward to raising the profile of the story as best we can. And I cannot thank all of you enough tonight for having done such an amazing job in presenting the story. I was almost in tears hearing some of the oral histories from the podcast. It really helps you understand the impact that this event and the mutiny trial had on the lives of these men who were impacted, and how that resonates today with their surviving descendants and relatives. This story is very much alive. And so I look forward to seeing how all of you can help us keep telling it and help everyone to learn about its importance. So thank you.
Great. And then do we have Eric?
Oh yeah, no, I think that's great. As far as once again, thanks for everybody and their presentations this evening. And I think do we have some time for questions, or were there more people after us?
Yeah, we do have a couple more.
Well, great. Well, we're good. I think that was great by Kelly's wrap up there. So as far as for the Park Service, but we're looking forward to working with all of you in the future, and you guys helping us spread the story. This is an important story, and one that is even more relevant with what's happened in the past years. And so I think this is a story that very relevant today, and one that we'll continue to tell. So I'm excited about what the future has in store for the site and the park and our partnerships.
Great. Thanks, Eric. And so with that, leading up to the whole what's happening locally with what was going to be called the Concord Park and the efforts of the East Bay Regional Park District, and specifically the Black Employee Collective, I want to introduce Yuli Padmore. And Yuli currently serves as the executive assistant to the government affairs team that is part of the general manager's office in the East Bay Regional Park District. And along with other co-founders, Yolanda Bariel Knight and Sabrina Pino, Yuli helped form the first ever Black employee collective of the East Bay Regional Park District. And they have a very unique perspective working locally with this story, going from the naming and getting support for the visitor center that you've heard a little bit about. So please welcome Yuli Padmore, who's going to be joining us in her role as co-founder of the Black Employee Collective. And she's going to talk about how their group has taken action and how we can take action to support the national history of Port Chicago and how we can support these efforts.
Yes. Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Am I okay? Oh, great. So first of all, just so honored to be here this evening and join everyone. And I totally second everything that everyone said, because it has just been a very good presentation. So as you mentioned, Benisa, my name is Yuli. I'm a part of the Black Employee Collective with the East Bay Regional Park District. We formed, and I am here in that role today, a very proud member of the East Bay Regional Park District and what we do, access to our parks, and working, as Reverend Diana told me today, that we have a love affair between the Friends of Port Chicago National Memorial and the National Park Service. And I couldn't agree with her more. We're working collaboratively on a joint visitor center. This work, has been going on for a very long time. But let me tell you how the Black Employee Collective was formed. We came together when we heard about the naming of this park, and kind of wanting to ensure that we honor this history, this great work that the National Park Service has been doing, and the great work that Friends of Port Chicago National Memorial have been doing. And honestly, that was the biggest thing. When we learned this story, as many of you have said this evening, many of us didn't know this history. We felt saddened not knowing this history, finding out that this had happened here in the Bay Area, which I've often heard referred to as the bubble, right? So having all of these kind of experiences and not knowing that this tragedy had happened. So learning about this history and learning about these brave men and Thurgood Marshall was a big reason for my collaborators, Yolanda Burial Knight, and co-founders of the Black Employee Collective, Yolanda Burial Knight and Sabrina Pinnell. We said, let's get all of the Black employees together because they need to learn this story. They don't, and when we came together, many of them had mentioned driving on the freeway, never knowing the history related to the Port Chicago story. And ultimately, what does that mean? I think what it means is that we need to ensure that this story is further told. And I think National Park Service has been doing a fantastic job long before any of us of telling this story. And had it not been for the great work of Reverend Diana and Kelly English and Tori Starling and all the people, Eric Stearns, all the people there who are telling the story, I'm not sure we would know about it. So this joint visitor center, what this joint visitor center means to me, what the joint visitor center will mean to the Bay Area, to our nation, I can't even fathom where to even begin. So in further depth of that explanation, how did the name begin? How a lot of folks probably want to know the story. Well, we came together and we were aware of the fact that the park was going to be named to honor the history in general. However, I think the most important, there's so much in addition to that history. I'm sorry, I was distracted, but ultimately we have this story where we came forward with the naming of Thurgood Marshall Regional Park, home of the Port Chicago 50. This could not have happened without a united community, a community of NAACP, Friends of Port Chicago National Memorial, United Veterans Council of Pittsburgh, and Citizens for Historical Equity. All of these members of the community that cared about this story being told and ensuring that this history would persevere, and maybe with the hopes of someday it being included in the curriculum of our education, further supporting the need for the visitor center. So the community came together. They named this park Thurgood Marshall Regional Park and presented it to our East Bay Regional Park District, who adopted this naming, and I mean, by the grace of God, I mean, it happened, and we were totally thrilled about it. But what does this mean ultimately for the advocacy of where we're going? How does this proceed? Meeting with the group here, Contra Costa Bar Association, and the great work that Thurgood Marshall did. How do we keep going? Well, we have a letter of support, and that letter of support we are very excited about. We want to get everybody, get as much advocacy and support as possible. So the interest on behalf of our group is to present these compiled letters of support to the Vice President, Madam Vice President Kamala Harris, and see how we can further receive funding to ensure that this education is told, not just here in the Bay Area, but also throughout our nation, so that one day there's a group of students from the East Coast that are capable of coming here, or from the South that can come to California and learn about the Great Migration, or all of those aspects. So ultimately, Benisa, I believe I sent you the letter of support.
Mm-hmm. We can distribute that. Mm-hmm.
That would be great. And we would love to just request that for many of the people here that have heard the story and are as passionate about it as the Black Employee Collective, as many of the community that have come together united, that you also take a look at that, and feel free to send me an email, and we'll include your information in the packet that we plan to send. So yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up. And I just am really grateful to be here, and grateful for all of the work that the Black Employee Collective has done to bring us here today. And there's so much more to tell about this story, and I'm available. So feel free to contact me.
Great. Thank you so much, Yuli. We really appreciate that. And I think it's because of efforts such as yours, including the fact of how I met you, where we did not know each other, and our committee had identified this as a topic for one of our town halls, and you introduced yourself in this meeting, and you just talked about what you were doing related to the Port Chicago disaster. And then that's how we connected. So it's by putting that out there, and people who may have heard inklings of things coming together, how it grows. So I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you for saying that, Benisa.
Yeah.
And it's very true. I mean, that's kind of what we do. We go out there, we tell the story. It started with National Park Service, and we'll just continue. We'll continue to spread the story that they've shared with us, and try. I mean, right now, as much word of mouth as I can get out. So really appreciate you acknowledging that. So
great. Thank you. And because we did have this program, and with all our invited guests who are talking about the actions that are being taken, it of course is designed to help spur this within the Contra Costa County Bar Association. And I'm going to ask Patanisha Davis Pearson just to put a little plug in for that and say a few words around how we might be able to support.
Thank you so much, Benisa, and thank you to everyone who's presented. And I want to give a special shout out to Jonathan Lee, who had this thing that he came up with and talked briefly to a couple of us about, and then ran with it, and it brought us all together tonight to share these wonderful stories. As Benisa said, my name is Patanisha Davis Pearson. I'm an attorney, and I'm a member of the Contra Costa County Bar Association's Board of Directors. There are no words or actions that anyone can do to restore those who were affected by the atrocities that resulted at and from what occurred at Port Chicago and the trial that followed thereafter. But on behalf of the Contra Costa County Bar Association, we invite you to participate, the participants of tonight's program, to send cards, letters, or any other acts of reparations to the surviving family members of the Port Chicago 50, or other support to the National and Regional Park Service in their efforts to bring awareness to what happened at Port Chicago. And lastly, there are several people in the legal profession here tonight, We ask that you help in supporting the exonerations of the Port Chicago 50. Again, as Jonathan Lee said, we ask that you remember Port Chicago, that each one of you teach another one what occurred by sharing what you've learned tonight. If you would like to send anything to the bar, please mail it to 2300 Clayton Road, Suite 520, Concord, California, 94520. Don't worry about writing that down. Our executive director, Teresa Hurley, is going to send out an email that will include the address to everyone who are registered for tonight. And you will also receive resources, which Yuli just talked about, the letter that she sent, that you can use, and that will be included in the email address as well. So thank you so much. And I'm going to turn it back over to Vanessa.
Great. Thanks, Patanisha. And, you know, we have about 5 minutes or so for questions. I do want to open it up to the group. Maybe you can put your questions in the chat, and we can, Teresa, maybe if you can kind of identify questions. We have so much knowledge on the invited speakers today who are so intimately involved historically, through study, personally, through family, from so many angles. And I would like to take this opportunity, if people do have 1 or 2 questions, that we can use this time to gain a little bit more insight. And if you could just put those in the chat or raise your hand. And Teresa, I'm going to ask you, because I can't see my whole screen, or another committee member to help field questions.
Yep, no worries, Vanessa.
Okay.
While we're waiting for questions, I just want to let everybody know I'm going to be sending out an email after this program with all of the links that have been put in the chat tonight, the different information that Yuli mentioned, and all of that. So some good resources for you to use to help support these different efforts to get some justice done. All right, here we go. Got
Great
a question. Yep. Were the men who were tasked with cleanup after the explosion the same ones who were ordered to continue loading munitions afterward?
I can say yes, but would one of the invited guests like to talk about that, especially as how it relates to the fact that they were asked to do that cleanup and immediately go to work, and then other folks, though I want to call them the managers, I'm not in the military, obviously, got time off to deal with this, and they didn't, having to go back to work. So would someone like to tell a little bit about that, maybe? Kelly, I know you talk about it every day.
Well, I put it in the chat real quickly, but I see that Eric turned his camera on, and I think I'll let him go ahead and give his answer to that.
Okay.
Yeah, so yes, the answer to the question is yes. The guys who went down there and unfortunately had to clean everything up were also the guys that were asked to go back to work. Also, not mentioned in the presentation, but some of these guys, after the explosion happened, went down and put out the fires in the revetment that was closest to the ships. And those guys were actually honored. And some of them were some of the guys who later were asked to go back to work. And so ironically, Admiral Wright honors these guys, but then later threatens to put some of the same individuals possibly in front of a firing squad, or charge them with mutiny.
Hey, Eric. So as a caveat to that piece as well, that I learned in this process from a JAG, Judge Advocate General perspective, a lot of military members believe that the sailors were given time off like the white officers were given, which unfortunately they were not. They were just not loading ammunition. So they weren't doing their appointed duty, but they were doing the cleanup. So there's some misconception, at least in military circles, that say these Port Chicago 50 and the other 200 and something sailors were given time off like their white officers. They actually weren't. So yes, they did load, but they were also having to clean up as well. So a little nuanced that a lot of military officers, at least in the review process, historically have misconstrued the truth based on inaccurate historical military history, if you will.
Thanks so much for that, Tom. And, you know, I think the other thing to remember as well is that cleanup was traumatic in and of itself, because part of the cleanup involved recovery of body parts and other pieces of what had been two gigantic ships and loading dock and everything. So even, you know, the cleanup itself, and also too, my impression is that it's not, the men weren't exactly tasked with cleaning up. I mean, I guess they technically were, but many of them jumped right in to help. They were not, they felt it was their duty to help clean up. It's not something that they were ordered and forced to do. They felt they owed it to their brothers who had perished to help with this effort. But it was completely traumatic. And, you know, no one ever talked about PTSD back then. But I mean, you can imagine that, you know, within 3 weeks, this horrible explosion has happened. The survivors, some of whom are injured, are assisting with cleaning up of body parts, and then having to go right back into doing the same dangerous work that had just gotten a lot of their friends killed. I mean, there's no way that any 20-something-year-old or teenager can come out of that experience without a serious amount of trauma and fear. And that's something that I think we understand quite well today that was not accounted for at all at the time.
Yeah, Spencer Sykes said that when he was interviewed about it, that it was something that he thought about for the rest of his life every day. What he saw that day when he had to clean up everything down there.
Right, and it seems as though there's a few questions that are really related to going beyond just exoneration of the men, but has there been any efforts, are there any efforts to recognize the families or financial compensation for the families, and happening, you know, what's happening with obtaining reparations for the families? Are there any efforts along that line as well? And I'll just ask that to anyone who might know.
This is a good question. I can tell you that in the legislation that Congressman DeSaulnier and Congresswoman Lee put forth this past summer, that they specify justice not just for the 50, but they actually have a list. They go through all of the original 258 who originally refused to load munitions, et cetera, et cetera. I do think that right now justice is being pursued in the form of setting the records right in terms of exonerating the 50. I think that there is intent to do something about the fact that every single one of those 258, I don't think a single one of them left the military with an honorable discharge. I think that there's some talk about setting the record straight. There has not been a lot of talk that I have been privy to about reparations. And I think that that is a conversation that will happen. I do think though that, I think that folks, my impression is that folks sort of feel like, let's see if we can get the 50 exonerated and some of the records set straight first, and then let's talk about reparations in many other forms. You know, the $3,000 of death benefit that was given, that's all that was given to the families of the Black sailors. I do not remember, Eric can probably tell me, possibly, if the families of the dead white officers and personnel received a higher death benefit at the time. I think they may have, I could have that wrong, but I think that's one thing that needs to be investigated, is if in fact Congress agreed to pay less of a death benefit to the Black victims' families, then that is a low-hanging fruit in terms of reparations. When you just can calculate the difference in today's dollars. I think that it's an interesting conversation. I think that it's one that will probably only unfold once the Navy has gotten to the point of exonerating the 50 and making things right for the others involved. And then I think that conversation will come right out of that.
Great. Thanks, Kelly. And that just really speaks to the time since the event to now, and just the efforts of getting it out. And it's one step at a time, slow but steady.
Yep,
And
there certainly is precedent for reparations, and when you have specific folks and families that it would be targeted towards. So I think, again, I don't think the conversation has really gotten off the ground because you have to get to the exoneration benchmark first.
Great. So with that, unfortunately, we don't have time for more questions, but hopefully this is just the beginning. And I want to encourage everyone who is present today to continue their efforts, whether or not you're taking the first step or you've taken many, many, many steps, including bringing others along. And it might include visiting the memorial site and learning more about the story, reflecting. I loved what was said about actually standing in the space of the disaster, which will give a completely different perspective. Supporting, creating advocacy and support for the Visitor Center. And that includes the Visitor Center, which is at the Thurgood Marshall Park, home of the Port Chicago 50, including letters to Vice President Harris. Efforts to continue exonerating the men and going beyond that. And most importantly, continuing to get the story out. It's something that should not be forgotten and something that should not be repeated. And to continue to acknowledge the men that were involved and to bring healing to the families. And with that, we have Veterans Day coming up, which is a perfect time for each of you in your own circles to talk about this piece and especially its place in the civil rights movement and these brave 16 to 22-year-olds who were standing up for their rights even then, and people still don't know that story. So I want to thank everyone for helping tonight, our invited guests, Mark Brunner and retired Lieutenant Commander House and Eric, Tori and Kelly, and thank you, Yuli. And I just also want to again thank the committee. As Patanisha said, Jonathan Lee brought this to our town hall committee and we all jumped on it, thought it was a great story. Not all of us had heard of it. And other members of the committee, thank you, Heidi Taylor, Julianne Giamona, Patanisha Davis Pearson, and Michael Pearson. So thank you all for supporting and bringing this, putting on this show for us and putting on this event to spread the word. I want to also invite you all to our continued series of town hall meetings. We have an upcoming program for 2022. Our first one is the Vincent Chen story. So this is another story that's not always well known. And Vincent Chen was a Chinese American who was beaten to death in a hate crime in June of 1982 on the night of his bachelor party. And his was the first federal civil rights trial for an Asian American. So we want to tell that story at our next town hall meeting. And also, as we move into 2022, I'd like all of you to think about and share topics that you'd like to see explored in the 2022 series. Drop those in the chat if you think of them now. Send me or Teresa an email if you have ideas like, how come they haven't done this? Or how come they haven't done this? Or this would be great. We're always looking for great ideas and we're starting our planning for the year. And with that, we also would love to invite anybody who would like to be part of and join our town hall committee as we move into 2022. We have a really great time, and sometimes we always tease that our meetings themselves should just be recorded, and that could be a town hall with the discussions that we really have, which are very, very rich and very informative, and just the sharing amongst ourselves. So with that, thank you all for coming. Yes.
Denise, could I just say one thing? I just want to recognize and thank Jason Fellis-Brett specifically for coming tonight. He's on the East Coast and he's joined us to talk about his personal reflections, his mother's reflections, and the loss of his uncle. I just wanted to make sure that he was specifically thanked for coming.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. That could not have been an oversight. We were so excited because that was also something we wanted to do, because we do think that it's something, the impact that it's had on people's lives and in their family. And that's a huge piece of the story that isn't being told. And when you look at the fact that many of those who were involved don't talk about it, and their families don't even know. And that's part of getting this story out, is to help those families recognize that those folks were heroes and need to be acknowledged, and that story needs to be told. So thank you so much, Jason. And thanks,
You are
John.
certainly welcome. Thank you. Thank you both.
Absolutely. And with that, are there any other comments before we close? Great. And if you are closing out, if anyone would just like to put in the chat, if this was your first time hearing about this, or just what any reactions or what you learned or an insight, feel free to put those in the chat as we close out. Thanks, everyone.